Crafting Shabbat, Betzalel and the Rabbis. And I opened it because we've spent the last couple weeks, except for this past Shabbat's digression into the golden calf, talking about the creation and the construction of the Mishkan, the Holy Tabernacle. And the way that this parsha opens is not by going back into talking about the Mishkan, but about the commandment to keep Shabbat. Sheshet yamim ta'aseh melacha uveyom hashvi'i yiyeh lechem kadosh kodesh Shabbat Shabbatot ladonai kol ha'oseh vo melacha yamut. 6 days shall work be done, but on 7th day there shall be to you a holy day, a Shabbat of rest to Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death. Kind of an intense encapsulation of the importance of Shabbat. We live in a world where 6 days we labor, and on the 7th day we rest on the pain of death. A rest or else kind of moment. But I think it has to be that intense because I don't know about the rest of you, but I can let my work consume me. If I didn't think the consequences were so dire, maybe I wouldn't treat it as sacredly as I have to. And the command continues, Lo ta'avru esh bekol mishvotechem uvayom hashabbat. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations on Shabbat. Work is not just what we do, but it is also the tools by which we do it. We are creatures kindled by fire. There are some teachings that we are the divine flame embodied. And therefore, also, Aish, kindling of new fire, is prohibited. And that's the thing that also separates Shabbat from our holidays. On our holidays, we may transfer flame. We can not kindle new fires, but we can transfer flame. We can cook food. And that's what makes Shabbat and holidays different. But as the Torah continues, after this brief digression of Shabbat, of this continued command for Shabbat, we go back into talking about the Mishkan. And, I'm actually going to skip the next piece of Torah and go to the part that I really thought was fascinating. Exodus 35:10 on the second page, which is V'chol hacham lev, v'chem yavo'u, v'ya'asu et kol asher tziva Adonai. And every wise-hearted, the hacham lev, among you shall come and make that which Hashem has commanded. And it continues, Et hamishkan, ve'et ohalo, ve'et michsahu, ve'et karasav, like the tabernacle and all of the things. And the Torah continues, as we just heard, to list all of the different implements of holiness, all the tools that allowed us to get close to Hashem. And I was really struck by this line, Hacham Lev, every wise-hearted. And what does that mean for our implications as people who seek Chokhmah, who have spent thousands upon thousands of years of crafting a tradition that prioritizes Chokhmah, that prioritizes finding wisdom. And what does that mean? And not just wisdom intellectual, but Hakam Lev, the wisdom of the heart, which I think is one of the greatest things our tradition has to offer, is it's not just an intellectual, separate wisdom, a kind of abstraction, but it's wisdom that is lived in the world and also felt in the body, down to the beating of the heart. And where in our tradition have we maybe expounded the most and found the most wisdom? But in nothing less than the commandment that opened the Parsha, the observance and the crafting of Shabbat, which takes us into this piece of Mishnah from Hagigit, Perek Aleph, Mishnah 8, Chet. And I was lucky to have learned this week with one of my teachers, Dr. Candace Levy. And we got into it, and it felt perfectly suited to what we're going to be talking about today, which is Heter Nedarim Porchin Be'avir Ve'ein Lahem Al Ma Sheyishkom Yismochu Chilchot Shabbat Hagigot V'ha'am Ilot Harei Hem Keharim Hatluyin Besa'ara Shehem Mikra Muat V'hilchot Merubot. The laws concerning the dissolution of vows, which the Talmudic and the Mishnaic rabbis were very proficient in, hover in the air and have nothing to rest on. The laws concerning Shabbat, the holidays, and trespassing are as if mountains hanging by a hair, for they have scant scriptural basis. There's not a lot of Torah about them, but they have many laws. And I thought that this was interesting. I thought that this was kind of shocking when we were learning it in class, because when I think about Jewish law, I do think about things like the laws concerning Shabbat, the laws concerning the holidays, the do's and the don'ts, and how do we structure our time. And the Torah does have those in there, but it's not the main thing. It's not mainly what we spend much of our time in the Torah talking about, especially as we've seen in the last 5 Parshiot. They're all concerned with the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of the Holy Tabernacle, which by the time that we settled in the land, that was no longer even relevant because they built the temple. And then in our day and age, the temple is destroyed. We don't even have the temple or the holy vessels or the sacrificial services. All we have are the laws of Shabbat, the laws of the holidays, the way to structure our time. And that really got me thinking about from where do we get the way that we structure our time? And the answer is the rabbis of the Mishnah. In Mishnah Shabbat 7:2, they talk about the 40 labors, the labors of the 39 avot malachot de Shabbat, the 39 labors that are forbidden on Shabbat: sowing, plowing, reaping, binding. You can read through the whole list. I feel like I don't need to necessarily read through all of them. They're really fascinating. I think much has been written and expounded upon all the different labors, so I'm not going to get into it. But I do find it fascinating that even now, what I think separates our contemporary times from maybe the times of the rabbis is that most of these are not labors that any of us are doing in our day-to-day work. Most of us are not reaping or threshing or tanning, which means that for us, the question of what is work is even more pressing than it was for the rabbis. At least the rabbis kind of understood what creative work was, while we live in a world of even more intellectual abstraction. And I think that gets me to the point. Slightly. My first point. There's 2 main points. But the first point is connecting much as the rabbis do, the concept of creative work and Shabbat. Because they're connected in the Parsha. First, we get the prohibition against work on Shabbat, and then we go immediately into all of the works that were made for the Mishkan. And the Talmud synthesizes it beautifully, where it asks the primary categories of labor, which are 40 less 1, the 39 avot melachot de Shabbat. From where do we get this? Why do we get these 39 numbers? Because the rabbis of the Talmud, they read the Mishnah, and they read this category, and they say, where did we get this? What is this from? And then there's a machloket, because Jews, of course there's a machloket, of course there's a disagreement, of course you can't just have one answer, but we get two pretty good answers. And the first is Rabbi Hanina bar Hama said, they correspond to the labors of the tabernacle. All of the things that were done to create the Mishkan are the things that are prohibited. And Rashi continues with that. Rashi explains that these are the labors that are, as we saw in our Parsha, you shall not do work on Shabbat. Therefore, these are the things that you shall not do, all the things that are necessary to build the Mishkan. And then we also have Rabbi Yonatan, son of Rabbi Eliezer, who said to them, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yosai, they correspond to the amount of times that that the word melacha, the word labor, is used in the Torah. I didn't double check that. I didn't go through the Torah and count how many times they use the word melacha. And I'm going to go actually with Rabbi Hanina's point that it's about the labor of the Mishkan, which is what is prohibited with Shabbat. And this is actually something I was taught as a child. This is not a new piece of Torah for me. But I love it. I think it's fascinating. I'm really struck by transferring the physical labors needed to create a holy space was transferred for what are the labors that are prohibited in order for us to create holy time, to craft Shabbat, to make Shabbat for ourselves. We must actually refrain from physical labor in space. That's how we make time sacred. But then, who is the person who crafts Shabbat? And who is the person who crafted the Mishkan? Which takes us to Betzalel. Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur of the tribe of Yehuda. Again, much has been expounded about the meaning of his name and his tribal designation, but I think that Betzalel functions as a role model for the rabbis. I think when the rabbis are looking throughout the Torah, because they know the Torah like the back of their hands, they can quote 3 words of any pasuk and know exactly what chapter, verse, the entire context. They know the Torah. And when they're looking for themselves in the Torah, I think one of their primary people they find as an example for what they're doing is a character like Betzalel. Someone who's described as wise, as it says in Exodus 35:31. Vayimale oto ruach Elohim bechochma. And he has filled within the spirit of Hashem in wisdom. And I think that serves as a rabbinic role model, because the rabbis are living after the physical destruction of the temple. The holy space that the rabbis imagined was the dwelling place of Hashem has been destroyed. The stones torn down, and all the vessels either smashed or carted off to Rome. The physical space doesn't exist in the same way. The mount is still there, but the house of God has been destroyed. And the rabbis are trying to figure out what to do, how to make holiness. How do we make Shabbat? How do we make the holidays? If there's no service, if there's no temple, there's no avodah, like we can't bring our sacrifices to Jerusalem. How do we do this? And they look through the Torah and they find this maker, this person who makes, this craftsman, Betzalel. And they think about the wisdom that he was imbued with in order to craft all these objects. And not just him, I just pulled his name, but as our portion this coming week talks about, it wasn't just Betzalel, it was Betzalel along with all of the people. And I think the rabbis were inspired by, it does take a crafter to kind of direct the work, but you need the entire community to be along with you. Because Shabbat is fine on your own. It's all right. Shabbat at your house, just you. You're not reading Torah unless you have a scroll at your house. You're not davening in community. You're not being lifted in song by your fellows. You're not benching the way we bench when we're in community. You're not inviting people to bless with you. You're not saying Kaddish. You're not doing Kedusha out loud. You're not elevating in the same way. And I was just struck by the fact that I think when the rabbis were looking for themselves in the text, they used Moshe as Rabbeinu, Moshe as our rabbi, but they weren't saying that they were Moshe. They said, we learned from Moshe the way that all of Israel learns from Moshe. All of Israel learns from Moses. But they said, Betzalel, we can aspire to be like Betzalel. We can't be like Moshe. We're not prophets. But we can craft. We can build something that's maybe even more enduring than a tent made of beautiful metals and tanned skins and dyed wool, or even a house of stone with cedars. We can craft something that can outlast the ravages of time because it's a holy palace in time, as Heschel teaches. If we carve out the space by prohibiting certain creative labors, certain melachot, we can craft a place in time. And I'm coming to the end of my time, ironically. Just as we're coming to the end of Shabbos. And I want to just bring something from one of my classmates, Lauren Bookman, in his book, Make to Know, which is about the creative process and how creativity, and for many creative people, the process itself is an act of discovery. And here, in this chapter, he talks about an interview with the architect Frank Gehry. And in it, he asks, Frank Gehry begins with a lament about the disconnect between architecture and the artistic tradition. Architects have forgotten their heritage, that they were artists, and the world has diminished as a result. And then he continues. Lorne says, it's asking great questions born out of deep curiosity is the entry point into the uncertainty of the creative space. And then he quotes Gehry again. Curiosity is what I think starts it all. Talmudic scholarship is the model I use. The form of learning is all about questions that lead to questions. And those Talmudic scholars never gave up. Gary continues, I'm not religious, but I was always struck that everything starts with a question. What's right for this? What should I do? What kind of space is it? How does it fit into the surrounding space? How should it relate to the people? And that's where I'll leave you, is we're all, much like Betzalel, Yehudim of the tribe of Yehuda. And we have within us the ability to craft the spaces in which we exist, both physical space and our space in time. And one of the things we have as Jews is the ability to choose to observe Shabbat and holidays in a way that actually crafts them in the moment. As we observe, we also create. And maybe it's not a physical creation, but I think that's okay. I think we were given permission to create in time by the rabbis, and are the people who are going to keep creating the future.